Joining us now because we were talking earlier about this crazy idea of what they're calling Bob Casey in Pennsylvania carrying the bucket of greedflation. And I saw this story last week, and it really struck me as a story that really just stunned me in the brazenness by which they're blaming this on corporate greed. Stefan Padfield is on with us from the Free Enterprise Project. Stefan, thank you for taking a little time out with us. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
It's our pleasure. So first and foremost, the story I sent to you guys was this $25 Happy Meal in a McDonald's in California that somebody tweeted out. But I think that this story also feeds into this narrative of this greedflation that they're claiming is now running rampant, and that inflation isn't the dilution of the um, monetary's fault. It is now somehow the fault of the greedy oligarchs that run these companies. First off, unpack the all too real influences that create a $25 Happy Meal at a place like McDonald's, but also try to help us unwind this narrative that I worry is going to grip us through the election of greedflation.
Well, I think a lot of it just boils down to that the left, whether through cynicism or just lying or just ignorance, doesn't understand basic economics and free market competition. And they really do have seemingly this utopian view that money just grows on trees, and the only issue is how you redistribute it. And if their plans don't work out the way that they want in terms of, hey, we're going to spend all this money, we're going to keep passing these billion-dollar bills, but somehow prices should stay just as they are. And if prices go up, then we're just going to blame the greedy capitalists. I mean, the whole thing just falls apart with just a basic sort of econ 101 analysis in terms of the money supply, in terms of other issues like supply chain issues that are still a very real thing.
Hmm.
But I think it's also worth noting that you certainly have apparently a lot of ignorance, right, in
Sure.
terms of these politicians and a lot of just cynicism. But there is also always, it's always worthwhile to ask, what if the actual outcome is in fact the intended outcome, right?
Yeah.
So if the $25 Happy Meal is in fact precisely what they want because they want chaos, or if, I think we might talk about the minimum wage a bit later and how it leads to actual more unemployment, particularly in the communities that they claim to want to help, that actually leaves more people on the government dole, and that's what they want. And again, this idea of just undermining society because they have this idea that this utopia is going to somehow spring from the chaos. And so there's multiple things going on. There's the ignorance, and I typically break this down when people scratch their heads about what the left is doing. You have to think in
Mm.
terms of true believers, useful idiots, opportunists, and cowards. And it's the confluence of all of them that lead us to the insane places that they take us.
Well, and we were just celebrating Thomas Jefferson's birthday. He was in France as the French Revolution started to grip, and Robespierre tried to use this very kind of scenario where he went and gathered the impoverished, the poorest of the poor, realizing there was enough of them to overthrow the king and make him king. This is not the first time we've seen this paradigm. Is there a narrative that we should be, Stefan, using to blunt the power of this going towards November?
Well, I think one thing is you're seeing some great work being done in the space of just exposing the
Hmm.
underlying radicalism of a lot of this. So, a book just came out by the title of Next Gen Marxism. You've got Chris Rufo's book. There's a line of books sort of going back the last couple of years that really break down what's underlying of this radicalism. And I think that's a very important narrative, right? And we see this in all sorts of places with the distortion of language. So, we have things like gender affirming care, social justice, Black Lives Matter, all these phrases and terms that sound great. Nobody would disagree with them on their face, but it's when you lift up the hood and look what's actually going on underneath that you see the radicalism. So certainly part of it is exposing that very sort of thread that goes back, as you say, to the French Revolution and maybe even earlier than
Yeah.
that. And then the other is just basic economics, right? I mean, pointing out that I remember from in my own experience, I was buying this narrative about the gender wage cap, and then somebody pointed out to me, said, "Look, if it's really a free market economy, the gender wage gap doesn't exist, because if there are women being underpaid, somebody's going to come into the market and pay them more, because that's an arbitrage opportunity." And then when I started digging beyond just the mainstream media, literally every economic study that actually takes things into account, like how many hours you're willing to work, how much experience you have, and so forth, there's either absolutely no gender wage gap or it's at most 4 cents, whereas the left keeps telling us it's something like, I don't know, 40 cents. So
Hmm.
they're just lies. And so the basic economics of free market competition, that it's not just simply, hey, the CEO is making $40 million a year, so he can just give that to his employees. That'll work one quarter, and then the business is going to get undermined because nobody will want to be the CEO, and the company will tank, and then you'll have no jobs, right? So it's
Right.
both the underlying radical narrative, and then it's just the basic economics.
Well, and that's one of the things that I think is, what do they say? There's lies, damn lies, and statistics, and they get very good at pulling some random number and say, look, this is. But one of those statistical analyses that I thought debunks this whole idea of greedflation is we hear all the time in the press, Stefan, about the consumer price index, and everyone loves to flog away at the consumer price index. But one of the ones that I look at is the producer price index, which month after month, as they release these numbers, is going up more than the consumer price index, which I think indicates that the people who make the things that we consume are taking it in the wallet a lot harder than we are.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And again, it's one of those sort of, you see these politicians on the left sort of standing around and hand waving, and don't look over here, just look over here at this one graph that I have. The other place that I've seen this very recently is, for a while we've heard this narrative, and people just would say flat out that the business case for diversity has been proven. And they would just trot that out as if it's a done deal. And they would cite 4 McKinsey studies, speaking of lies, damn lies, and statistics. And those have now been thoroughly debunked, right? Which really should surprise no one. You can either hire on the basis of merit, or you can hire on the basis of something else. And if you
Mm-hmm.
hire on the basis of something else, then you're going to undermine performance, right? And so it's not that shocking that these studies that said, oh, yeah, if you just forcibly move the chess pieces of your demographics around, with the sort of central planning hand, everything will be fine, right? It's the same story with the economy. We're going to pump all this money in. We're going to have these crises that we're facing in terms of the supply chain issues, and it's showing up in the data. But don't look at the data that points out that the companies are just responding to market forces, and they're doing the best they can. They don't want to drive away customers, by
Mm-hmm.
putting less products in their
Exactly.
offerings, right? They want to make you come to their store and buy their products.
How similar, Stefan, is this to what happened in Venezuela when Hugo Chavez instituted wage increases, mandatory wage increases, and then when the cost of everything went up to match the mandatory wage increases, he came in with price controls, and a lot of businesses shut down. You wound up with those food riots. Is there some correlation to what happened there?
I think certainly there is, and it's frightening how fast this can happen. I mean, we have a lot of reasons to be
Mm-hmm.
optimistic about our economic health, but if you just keep doubling down, I mean, this is another thing that we see from the left, is when their plans don't work, they don't step back and say, hey, maybe we're just pumping too much money in the economy. Maybe the minimum wage doesn't work. They just double down, right? Just as you
Right.
said, oh, the wages don't work, so we'll do price controls. And the system, this is another thing. I can go on and on about sort of the delusions of the left, but this idea that the money is just going to be there magically growing on trees, right? It is ultimately a fragile system at the end of the day. Yes, we have a lot of resources and a lot of reasons for optimism, but if you just keep hammering on incentives and keep going against basic market economics, eventually it just falls apart. It is not just natural law that you're going to just have this wonderful capitalist economy that we've had for years. So yes, it is very scary, and there is a correlation for sure.
Well, how much of that is tied to the fact that they can actually just print more dollars? We watched it during COVID, and just to pay everyone to stay home, they were just printing money, almost as if they said, all that stuff they warned you about when we released the gold standard has come to fruition, and the phrase "the full faith and credit of the U.S. government" has almost become a punchline, Stefan.
Yeah, and I think it's partly just basic human nature, right? When you have the ability to, sort of do good works, quote unquote, everybody wants to kick the can down the road. Nobody wants to say enough is enough.
Hmm.
We need to start balancing the budget, and so the temptation is so great that that issue goes across party lines, right? It seems like no politician, or certainly not enough politicians, are willing to just say, "Look, I know you want X, Y, Z, but we just can't give you everything." I mean, even the modern monetary policy economics that suggests that under certain conditions you can print money relatively freely. The politicians that tout that all forget the under certain conditions, right? They just
Hmm.
go right with you can print, and they're just, oh, we found our economists, let's just print. And it's, again, it's just not honest, and it's very troubling. But it just seems like nobody has the willpower to say, okay, we're going to stop doing this, and we're going to stop doing it here, unfortunately, until the people just say enough is enough, I assume.
Well, and is this going to have an impact on the presidential race? Because it seems like President Biden is banging this drum, but it seems like Robert F. Kennedy is not, and so that's two out of the three, at least media covered presidential candidates that are saying this is not what you think it is. I don't think they could have picked a worse senator to be the standard bearer for greedflation than Bob Casey, because maybe they need to pump him up because Fetterman is seeming less and less like a left-wing Democrat than he was when he got elected in there. But how much of an impact, Stefan? Not asking you to endorse or anything. I know Free Enterprise Project is a nonprofit, and you're not weighing in, but especially in the congressional races, when we see the House Freedom Caucus get attacked for trying to rein in spending and things like that, what kind of impact on these congressional races are we going to see?
So I still have a lot of faith in the common sense of the common man, and the people in their homes on their shopping trips know what's going on. And you can pump out all the messaging you want, and people are just shrugging it off and saying, "You're lying. I just went to the grocery store. I just went to the
Hmm.
gas pump. I know what's going on. I just tried to get a mortgage." I mean, on and on and on. This is sort of, again, these narratives that bump up against reality. Eventually, reality always wins, right?
Well,
When you're pushing
but
lies, yeah, go
But
ahead.
but doesn't that though feed into the greedflation? Because if certainly now the left has acknowledged the fact that the grocery store and the gas pump are working against them. So let's create, and how does ESG play into this? Because I feel like now that the cudgel of ESG is safely in the hands of the government regulators, they can say to ExxonMobil, lower the gas prices, or dot 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 implication regarding some SEC driven ESG campaign against them. As you said, we see it at the grocery store checkout, but they can turn around and say, yeah, that's the Wegman family. They're just greedy. That's why your groceries cost so much.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point, and certainly that's, a good response from the side of folks pushing that narrative.
Hmm.
But again, if we have enough people who actually are business people, right, who can stand up and talk to their employees and talk to the general public about what's going on, and I think the reality of people's personal experience still ultimately resonates with, look, we're trying our best, and we are subject to these forces that have been created outside of our control, and we're just responding in the best way we can. I think that story still sells. I will say, on the ESG front, fortunately, there's been a bit of pushback that has been meaningful. There's still a long way to go, but I believe that the use of these forces just overtly and brazenly has had to take a step back. So hopefully there's less of this pressure, and the companies have recognized that they actually can win, right? And successfully just say no. And we're not going to just do this because you've slapped the label ESG, environmental, social governance factors on it. And so somehow we're just going to have this complete radical leftist platform and it's supposedly pro-business, right? Because you put these letters on it. I think more and more people are recognizing that's not going to work. Right, it's not going to work with the public, and even the C-suites, even if they might be aligned personally, are starting to realize they've got to back off a little bit. So hopefully that pressure lessens, and we can continue to raise the awareness of people as to the problems around that whole narrative as well.
Well, you guys at the Free Enterprise Project spend so much time getting on these boards. Is a transparency movement amongst these companies perhaps a happy outcome of some of this? Is in their defense, they'll start saying, hey, here's what's going on, because I know that you guys try to get into these boards meetings, these quarterly reports and things like that, to make sure this stuff isn't going on. Talk about that a little bit, Stefan, and because sometimes we're not saying that everyone is great shakes when it comes to how they govern their companies.
Absolutely. So, I mean, we spend, again, you mentioned I'm at the Free Enterprise Project as part of the National Center for Public Policy Research. And at the Free Enterprise Project, we basically spend every day doing some form of activism in the name of proper corporate governance, getting back to neutral, free market capitalism. And so we engage through shareholder proposals, through direct conversations, through exposure, and we've been chipping away at this for a number of years now, and the progress sometimes seems slow, but there is progress, and we do take a lot of pride in the fact that the needle has moved, the agenda has been exposed, but there's still a lot of work to do. So again, we've got a slew of proposals that we're now getting into shareholder meeting season. So we'll be at these meetings and we'll be telling our story. And there's a lot of forces against us, right? I mean, basically the big three asset managers, the big two proxy advisors, the SEC. So sometimes it seems like it's a completely unwinnable uphill progress or challenge. But when we take a big step back and look at how this has changed over the course of the last 3 years or so, we really do see a change. And so even though sometimes the discrete battles can be a little frustrating, the work that we're doing and aligned parties are doing, I think ultimately we can really look at what's going on and see an effect, and we'll continue to do that.
It's nationalcenter.org. Stefan, thank you so much for taking a little time out with us this morning and trying debunking, laying the bunk to all this that's going on. You have a great morning, sir.
Thanks so much for having me. You as well.